Salve discipuli. In this video, we're going to begin the fourth declension. The fourth declension is second to last declension, and it's also a pretty short declension to learn. So we spent quite a bit of time on the third declension, and we're finally probably glad to be free of it. And I'm just looking to see if I've got my grammar book. It doesn't look like I do. Oh, I do. It's right there. All right. And so the fourth declension begins on page 56 in our Henley book. And adventus is our model word, because it's usually our model word. Just the first one on the list is the one we use for the model word. And so I'm going to have you recreate a noun chart. Including just the abbreviations of our cases, the nominative, the genitive, the dative, the accusative, and the ablative. Now, before we get into what are the actual words that are in this declension, probably also a good idea to, you know what, we're going to use portus as our, okay, I thought that didn't sound quite right. We're going to use portus, harbor, portus, portus, as our model word. So I'm going to go ahead and write that. Portus, portus. And that's our dictionary form. So we know that the nominative would be portus. Now, if you look at portus in the nominative, you might think, oh, this is a second declension masculine word, because we saw us there. Portus could look like a second declension masculine word. If we see a sentence with portus, and it's the subject of our sentence, but we don't see any of the other forms because in the sentence the word portus is used, we might get excited and say, okay, I know that's a nominative. And so we might accidentally put that into our, into our vocabulary and go porti, porto, portum, porto, porti, portorum, portis, portos, portis, right? Like a second declension word, but we would be wrong in doing that. It's not the nominative that tells us what declension things belong to. Just because we see something and it's got us and it's in the nominative, that does not mean that it's in the second declension, that it's a second declension masculine, because the dictionary form is portus, portus, portus. So this us is what's going to tell us, if we see an us in the genitive singular, that's what's going to tell us that these words, or that this word belongs to the fourth declension. Okay, this is the U declension. So we had, there weren't any common letters in third declension. It was just kind of all over the board. Second declension, we had a lot of O's, and the first declension we had a lot of A's. Guess what? Now we're back to learning a pretty simple, straightforward declension that has a letter kind of attached to it, and that letter is the U. This is going to have a lot of U's in it. Okay, portus, portus. On page 65 in our grammar book, now this is our grammar, right? This is this book. On page 12, rule 65, we have the declension of fourth declension. Us, us, ui. So this would be portui. Portui. Us, us, ui, Oh, and there's portum again. So port, everything to the left of the dash would be our stem. So portum. So we can't just look at portum and say, oh, it's a second declension word, because if you see something with and it's used in an accusative kind of way in a Latin sentence, it could be a second declension word, or it could be a fourth declension word, right? So we wouldn't necessarily know. And then we have portu, portu. So us, us, ui, u. Here we have portus, So again, we've got these two, which are the same. Port, 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 port. I'm going to go ahead and, so we've got us, oos, ooey, oo. Oos, ooum. And so ooum kind of makes you think of vacuum. And actually that's vacuus is a Latin word. It's a vacuus is a fourth declension Latin word, and that's where we get vacuum. Us, and then again we're going to do ibis for our dative plural and our ablative plural, and then us again. So we have three that are the same in the fourth declension, and now they're kind of different spots. We're used to these two being the same from the second declension, right? And from the first declension. Well, not second declension masculine, I should say, because second declension neuter, this would be an A. But from first declension and second declension masculine, we're used to these two being the same. Now we have these two still being the same, and the same as this. So, and so that is our fourth declension. There are several words that work like portus, which is harbor. And so remember, porta means door, gate. Sorry, gate. Porta means gate. And portus, it's the same stem, but now it's just a word of a different declension, and it means harbor. So we have adventus. This is where we get the word advent from. And that means arrival or coming. You may use advent as a derivative. We have equitatus. So you may use the word equine, which means having to do with horses. Equine sports are like sports like polo and steeplechase and things. Things that just horse sports. Exercitus. Can't. Attack. So this is kind of weird. We have the word impetus in English. And the word impetus means the thing that prompted you to do something. So, like, say there was a policy change at work, and so they changed policy on something. Somebody might ask, well, what was the impetus behind that, right? What was the thing that prompted that to happen? So you may use the word impetus as a derivative, although it's meant to be like, what was the impetus? What was the thing that attacked the present situation to cause the change? That's kind of what it means. We have metus, fear, spiritus, which means breath or spirit. Same word. Interesting. Now, the group spiritus that comes, you probably noticed that I'm saying us and us. Does the vowel sound really change because of the macron? I thought the macron just lengthened the vowel a little bit. So it depends on whether you're doing classical or ecclesiastical pronunciation. In classical pronunciation, this is the way it was actually spoken. The US without the macron would be an us, and the US with a macron would be us. So it would. In ecclesiastical, every vowel only makes one sound. And that sound would be ooh, or the U would be ooh. And so these two things would both be pronounced spiritus, just maybe this one a little longer. And so when we say the word spiritus, we're actually using the nominative because it's just the name of the organization. So we just use the nominative, right? Because that means like the name one, right? Portus, harbor. Senatus, senate. And so these are your new fourth declension words. You know, every time I give you a new declension, I like it when you identify similarities. So let's do that. The third declension, we had this E ending. Now it's just with a U with the I, so ui instead of just E, but we had an E for dative in the third declension, so that's not new. We had ibis in the third declension, so those are actually exactly the same. We had aurum and arum, so they've been ending in for the first two declensions, and then we had just or sometimes eum if it was an I stem in the third declension. So we're continuing that pattern of having our genitives end in M at least. We still have an M in the accusative here, like we've been seeing all along for the most part. Of course, this us isn't new in the nominative. Here, this is interesting. We had a with a macron, we had o with a macron in the second declension, and then we had e. They didn't have macrons, those e's down in the ablative in the third declension, but now we have a u with a macron. So that's not really new either. So a lot of what we're seeing here is pretty standard. Noticing that these two are the same, which is the case of all the neuter words. Not saying this is a neuter word, but that's the case of all the neuter words, and it's a case of some other words too, a lot of other third declension words, like ace and ace. So now that these two are the same as each other, that's nothing new either. Let's go back to our grammar, because anytime we start a new declension, it's also a good idea, I think, to talk about gender in the third declension. So I want to point this out to you. What gender are words in the, I'm sorry, I said the third declension, fourth declension. What gender are words in the fourth declension? Well, let's look. Rule 65 gives us the endings. Rule 66 talks about gender, and look how short it is. All masculine. These tend to be masculine words, except, and then it lists some exceptions for us. And these are exceptions we'll just have to memorize. And guess what? They're not going to show up in our vocab either. So when we see a fourth declension word, until we're told otherwise, which won't be for a while, we can just safely assume that they are masculine words. And also, they should tell us the gender. They should tell us the gender after the dictionary form if it's ever an exception to some rule that you've learned. And now this is a rule you're learning. Fourth declension or masculine. So if you're given a fourth declension word that's not masculine, you can expect for them to tell you what gender it is. Okay? So this is all masculine except for manus, which is feminine, and that means hand. For domus, which is feminine, and that means house. Except for cornu, which is neuter, and that means horn. So when we decline cornu, we're actually going to say cornua in the nominative plural and in the accusative plural. We're actually going to say cornua, because remember what we did to our neuters in the second and third declensions, we're going to do that same thing to neuters in this declension as well. But again, don't worry about that. That's not a vocab word. Horn is what cornu means. Genu, genus. That's also a neuter word. That means knee. And a few others, which it doesn't even bother to list. Okay? So let's take a look at our words in this declension. And I'm not seeing it say that any one of them is a different gender. So what that means is they're all masculine. There you go. Now, lastly, I'm not going to include it in this video, but also posted on the website is the YouTube video for the song for both the fourth and the fifth declensions, and it's a really good one. You'll want to check that out. It will help you memorize both of those declensions. All right, valete.